Hey everyone, David C. Anderson here coming at you from the Knife Center, and welcome to our latest episode of Beat the Icon, where we take a classic knife and we take a look at its competition and see if any of them can truly hold a candle to the original. And today we're looking at an everyday carry titan, the Benchmade Bugout. So the Benchmade Bugout is made in the USA, but it's not a particularly old knife. This pattern was introduced in 2017. So like I said, it hasn't been around that long, but it has quickly become an everyday carry icon. But it didn't quite start out that way. Now originally it was offered in this one color, this blue handle right here, which is a bit of an unconventional choice. You might expect a black handled knife to have, led the introduction of a new product like this. And they also marketed it originally towards ultralight hikers. They really trumpeted the light weight of this knife. 1.8 ounces makes it very easy to carry. And the blue color there actually worked really well with that kind of marketing tactic, because this blue color is something that is highly visible when out in nature, one of the least commonly occurring natural colors, actually. But as such, the name might have confused some people at first. Bugout, think of it as less bulletproof bug out bag apocalyptic durability, more bug out of town for the weekend portability. And that was the tact. But the things that made it good at that intended use made it appreciated by tons of people, because that lightweight and the thin Grivory scales in this case made it a very easy knife to carry. And the blade here is just a classic drop point, and importantly, it prioritized slicing efficiency, which is something at the time, even though this is clearly, obviously not the first thin-bladed knife out there, when it came out, as the industry is kind of coming off the heels of a trend of overbuilt, hard-use pocket knives, the efficiency and the slicing ease that this knife provided was a little bit revelatory, and it's something we've seen kind of reverberate through in the years to follow. Maybe this wasn't the knife that kickstarted that trend towards thinner blades, but it's certainly something of a poster boy for the trend, and it was a big watershed moment, I think, for the industry. And not just the industry, we actually see the influence of this knife reverberating through Benchmade's entire lineup today. Not just with this original Bugout, they've kind of expanded the Out family. It started with the Bailout, a more tactically inspired knife, but it's still drawing inspiration from what made the Bugout the success it is. Lightweight and thin, slicey blades. Just this year in 2022, we've seen the release of the Shootout, an OTF automatic, which is kind of like an automatic version of this Bailout right here. Again, thin blade, injection molded handles, keeping the weight way down. And we've also got the new Tagged Out coming out this year, a larger knife with a clip point blade, but still very, very thin and very, very lightweight handles. We've also got the Benchmade Redoubt, which O-U-B-T, it's spelled slightly different, and it's not quite as thin and lightweight on the handles here, but still fairly light, and again, thin, slicier blade compared to some of their previous tactical offerings. So that's a pretty cool thing to see, and that's all down to the success of this knife right here. Back to some of the other features you're going to find here so we can kind of compare it to some of the competition here to come. First off, price. We're about $144 for this knife right now. The blade itself, like I said, is quite thin with that almost full flat grind. S30V steel in this case with about a 3¼ inch blade length. Very efficient, very versatile for pretty much any kind of everyday common use you would want to throw at it. The handles are Grivory and are quite lightweight, like I said, 1.8 ounces for this whole knife overall. And they really tackled a lot of things, trimmed fractions of an ounce wherever they could. First and foremost is this mini deep carry clip, which I may be incorrect about this, but I'm pretty sure this is the first knife that this clip appeared on. Previous deep carry clips that Benchmade offered were larger. This one's slimmed down a little bit. They even went as far as to slim down the weight on the Axis lock bar itself, their crossbar style lock here. It is made of titanium, and of course titanium is not quite as hard as steel, so they gave it a DLC coating to make it last longer. So you get that fidgetability, that ambidextrous quality, and that strong lockup of the axis lock, and again, shaved just a little bit of weight off. They really went for it. And you know what? That lock itself is another thing that I think contributes to the success of this knife, and is something important for the competitors to consider, is a couple things. One, it is a completely ambidextrous system, and the knife with its reversible pocket clip and dual thumb studs capitalizes on that, makes it a fully ambidextrous option. But it's also a lock that has a finger-safe operation, meaning you can actuate it without your fingers ever crossing the path of that sharpened edge. And that offers just a nice little degree of safety that you don't even have to think about. It just happens. The handles here are almost entirely just that Gryvery material. The liners underneath only come to just past this screw on the handle right here. So roughly 2/3 of the handle are kind of what we would consider an unsupported handle. You can see, if we get a good shot of it, just a bit of that liner there. As such, you can actually flex these handles a little bit, and that's a perceived weakness for some. And I think that's one area where some of the competition has been able to kind of capitalize on that, which we're going to see in just a little bit. Now, there's a few different versions of this knife, not just the original lightweight version. With the success it's had, Benchmade has clearly seen that and have given us more over time, including some more premium options with more stable handles if that's what you want. First off, we've got the 535 BK-4, if you want to speak in product part numbers. This version is about $247 and change. Comes with an M390 coated blade, more edge retention there, and milled aluminum handles. Still rocks kind of the same set of liners underneath as the original does, but because you're dealing with this metal scale, or metal handle rather than the injection molded, a lot more stable there and a lot cooler looking with the milling pattern that they've got going on too. Very, very nice. We've also got a premium version with an S90V steel blade and carbon fiber handles, which is also available in the new mini size. They went even further with the lightweight capability, and this version comes in, some of the minis come in at about 1.5 ounces. Crazy lightweight. But this one is decidedly a mini knife. The cool thing about the full-size Bugout is you've got weight like a mini, but you're still dealing with what I would call a full-sized pocket knife. This doesn't feel mini at all. Very cool. But the mini Bugouts obviously start a little bit less expensive than the standard size. This premium version right here comes in about $270. You can also get this as that full-size version with the same configuration as well. Now, Benchmade aren't the only ones out there that have decided to kind of upgrade the Bugout experience. The aftermarket has stepped in. There's a huge aftermarket support system and following for the Bugout. And some of the options aren't even very expensive either. This is actually my personal Bugout that I carry, and I have a set of Flytanium's Crossfade G10 scales on it. They're about $39, and it's got a real cool shape, kind of puts a new spin on the profile, and gives a little more stability if that's what you're looking for. There's plenty of options for titanium. MetonBoss has a lot of great things and a lot of more exotic metals, but you don't even have to spend a lot of money to get a titanium scale either. This set from Berkshire Forge, Stonewashed Titanium, about $55. And the mini can be had for about $50. And they are rock solid, and they look good with pretty much any version of the Bugout out there because they're nice and neutral. But to kind of sum things up, the Bugout hits at an intersection of a lot of different traits, so that even if something like necessarily the lightweight nature isn't the most important thing to you, there's a lot of converging elements here that help it appeal to a broad base of people. And the competition, I think, to this knife, I think that lightweight nature comes in a little bit. I don't think anyone out there has truly bested or even really equaled the Bugout on its lightweight capability. Things have come close, but the competition seems to take little parts of what make this knife special and spin it off onto something of their own. But overall, we're going to see similar blade shapes or similar blade sizes, and especially importantly, thin, slicey geometry, along with those finger-safe locks, the generally lightweight nature, but more importantly than just lightweight, ease of carry. That's, in this case, what the Bugout gets with its weight. It's something very easy to carry. And even the competition that's a little heavier, that's an important consideration in the designs of those knives. And I'm going to start with one that's probably first on most folks' lips, and that is the Hogue Deka. Fantastic little knife here. This version comes with a G10 handle and a 20 CV blade for about 157 bucks. So it's a little more expensive than the Bugout, but this was the configuration that kind of launched this knife. They went a little more premium, a little more stable, but only recently they've actually introduced their injection molded version of this knife, which can be had in blue, like the original Bugout, and comes with a MagnaCut blade, and that's 127 and change here. So undercutting the Bugout by a decent amount, and you've got a very competitive design. 3¼ inch blade, as mentioned, stonewashed finish here on this clip point version. There's also black coated versions. There's also a modified Wharncliffe version if you'd like something a little bit different in terms of utility. But the clip point is the more versatile shape, high flat grind, nice and thin, maybe not quite as slicey as the Bugout because the grind's not quite as high, whereas the thickness is pretty much the same on the two blade stocks. Both of them are going to cut very efficiently. The G10 handles here feel very good. You've got some interesting patterning going on here. Hogue calls this their G-Mascus version. Deep carry pocket clip, which is reversible, so same type of capability there. And you've got a very well-tuned Axis style lock. They call it their Able lock, the ambidextrous bar lock enhanced, I believe is what it stands for. And that leads me to a bit of a pet peeve for me personally. Most of these, a lot of manufacturers are trying to put their own name on this lock because even though the mechanism is available for anyone to work on, the name Axis is still a Benchmade trademark. Can't we all just call this a crossbar lock or even a bar lock at this point? Anyway, that's an aside. It doesn't take anything away from the knife itself, which as mentioned is quite good. The fit and finish is excellent. Factory edge on this Hogue, pretty much the best in the production sphere. Very, very well done edge. Now I think Hogue and this next company are the two that have really embraced the crossbar style lock ever since it became available for other companies once the patent expired. And the other is SOG. Now they have a knife that is coming up soon. It actually hasn't been released just yet when we're filming this video. The Altair, which is very closely aimed at the Bugout itself. About 125 bucks, super lightweight. We got to see this at SHOT Show earlier this year, and if they manage to keep that fit and finish good, it's going to be a very compelling alternative. But even before that knife, a couple of years ago, they introduced the Terminus XR, which is maybe not quite as direct of a competitor to the Bugout in its original state, but over time they've kind of pushed it even more and more in that direction, and I'll get to that. But originally, and the reason that it is on this list is this is one of the few kind of budget-minded alternatives to the Bugout. As it sits right now, the base model of this knife comes in about $60. You can get it in red or green G10 with a stonewashed D2 blade. This version right here is actually one that Thomas, our man behind the camera, got for donating to Knife Rights last year. Good cause and a good knife as well that he managed to snag in the process. But that 3-inch blade, again, a little bit less length than the Bugout itself, but it is super solid. The action on their crossbar lock is very good. They've given it a flipper tab, which Benchmade have done flipper versions of an Axis lock in the past, and they've never had a lot of success with it. SOG really did their job well in tuning that flipper. It's kind of hard to do because you can't have this bar lock with an aggressive detent like a lot of flippers tend to have. The other thing that's nice, pull that lock bar back and the blade actually kicks open just a little bit. One of the cool things we're seeing people innovate on this mechanism. And you've also got the dual thumb studs there for that opening option. Deep carry pocket clip, tail mounted in this case. Newer versions don't have this, this big SOG cutout lettering. They're a bit more subtle if that's your thing. Awesome budget option. Over time, they've done more premium versions with S35VN steel. And the real one that I was hoping we'd be able to show today, but we didn't have one on the shelf, is the LTE version. S35 blades, handles, and liners actually constructed of carbon fiber to keep the weight way down. And price-wise, they're right on par with the Bugout right now. They're imported, but they're about 145 bucks. And even with all those lightweight considerations, the Bugout is still just a little bit lighter, but still a cool alternative to talk about. All right, so while we're on the topic of budget alternatives or more affordable alternatives to the Bugout, here's where things get, a little harder to find. There's not a lot of crossbar locks that are more affordable to start with, and even fewer of those are kind of Bugout-esque. I tend to think that the Terminus XR is kind of the only one, at least the only one that's less than $100 that I can think of. But there are some other finger-safe lock operation mechanisms out there that stand a little bit of a chance. That's one of them, but how about the Kizer HIC-CUP? It is a button lock knife, and although this is a right-hand biased lock, of course, we do have a reversible pocket clip along with it, and it's very easy to use with the left hand as well. This knife, you can open a couple different ways. It's got a top flipper. It's got a thumb stud, or a thumb cutout, I should say, which can also be used to reverse flick it. You've got the same kind of fidgety flicking action that you can get with a crossbar lock. And this knife right here is about $82. We've got a 3.15 inch blade, 154 cm steel. Compared to the Bugout there, sharpened edge is virtually the same between the two. This is definitely not a lightweight knife, or not a competitor in terms of weight to the Bugout, and the blade is a little bit thicker and not as highly ground with that flat grind geometry there. So it's not as light and it's not as slicey as the Bugout, but it gets some other things right in that quest to be similar. You can also get this with a flipper and an attachable thumb stud on that version. But that's a possibility right there, maybe stretching it a little bit due to the blade geometry. But I've got another button lock knife here that I think is even more compelling as an alternative, and that's the CIVIVI Altus. It comes in about 72 bucks. So again, not a truly cheap knife or truly inexpensive or truly budget knife, but definitely more attainable. This is about half price of the Bugout. And on paper, we're dealing with just a 3-inch blade here, but that's not down to actually having really less workable blade than the Bugout. It's due to the scale shape right here and where we measure things. But held up next to the Bugout, just a tiny bit less on sharpened edge compared to the two. High flat grind, thin blade stock, not as thin as the Bugout, but still thin enough. And it's a nice shape. It's a very versatile, usable shape, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit less generic drop point shape, which the Bugout has that generic drop point shape for better or worse. The button lock here works great. You can get that fidgetiness, works great left-handed as well. You've got your reversible deep carry pocket clip, and you've got your thumb studs. As far as budget alternatives go, this might even be closer in spirit than the Terminus XR, even though the locking mechanism is farther away from the Bugout. But I think that is definitely worth a look. They got nice thin edges on these guys, and they're put together very well. All right, let's take a look at some other options or some other locking mechanisms actually. And this one I kind of have on here because if I don't, some people are going to mention it. And I don't necessarily think that the Wii Banter is quite a direct competitor to the Bugout, even though, in the past we've made a video comparing these two knives specifically against each other. And the reason that I typically don't put it in the same class, at least in my head, is you don't have an ambidextrous lock, you don't have a finger-safe lock operation here. But if you're right-handed and that doesn't matter to you, a lot of the philosophies that went into the design of this knife can kind of be compared to the Bugout. We're about 108 or 109 with this knife, S35 VN blade, 3 inches, and like the Bugout, it's just a kind of distilled, simpler drop point shape. We'll call this one a spear point actually in this case, because the point is centerline. Thin blade stock, almost as thin as the Bugout, and a nice high flat grind to go along with it. Very versatile, very useful, very much focused on slicing efficiency. Slightly smaller form factor, although it has a more stable feel. If you're looking for something with a more solid feel, this is one of those options, in addition to the other G10 options we've looked at so far. We still do have that deep carry pocket clip here, but again, a right side biased lock, so you don't necessarily need the right side thumb or the right side screws for a reversible clip in this case. But these are also put together really well. They're a little bit more affordable. And like I said, have to mention it because the design philosophies really do line up even if the features don't. And it's also originally launched in blue. So I think that's another reason why people kind of like to think of them together. Next knife, and this one actually is, in a way I'll call this a response to when we did the Para 3 in this Beat the Icon series. A lot of folks, when I was doing that, said, why not the Bugout as an alternative to the Para 3? And I don't quite think it works that way. The Para 3, one of the important things about it, to me, in that video was the 3-inch blade length, and obviously the Bugout has a larger blade. Going the opposite direction, however, if you're looking for an alternative to the Bugout, the Para 3 lightweight might be a decent option. You can get it for less money than the Bugout with its BD1 blade for about $115, or you can get a particle steel version like this Spy 27 steel right here. This is about $154. It's not as light as the Bugout. I think we're about 2.4 ounces here. So it's not a heavyweight, but it doesn't quite hit the full lightweightness. And the blade stock here, even with its full flat grind, is a bit thicker than the Bugout. Here, we'll compare the two right there. So it's not an inefficient slicer, but it's not gonna equal the Bugout quite. This works. It has the compression lock, so you have finger safe operation. It's not as ambidextrous, obviously. Lefties can use that, but it's a little more awkward. I can't make it work because, you know, I'm a righty and I have more trouble with my left hand, but I can do the button locks easily with the left hand. But I think even more than the Para 3 lightweight as an alternative to the Bugout, this next knife even more hits that, and that is the Sage 5 lightweight. Comes in price-wise about $141. So you're right about the same level right there. You've got S30V steel, a little bit, actually a fair amount bit less sharpened edge because you have the finger choil on this Spyderco. Lets you choke up right behind the edge a little better. But in terms of general demeanor and philosophy, I think this knife lines up against the Bugout very, very nicely. The blade stock is thinner than the Para 3 lightweight, still not as thin as the Bugout, but thinner still, and you've got that full flat grind going on here. You've got more stable handles. We've got full-length nested liners on this knife, so if you still want a relatively lightweight knife, I mean, we're dealing, oh, interesting actually, this is a 2.7 ounce knife, so the Para 3 lightweight is actually a little bit lighter, and both have a fairly stable feel, although the Sage here feels a little more stable, and some of that actually does come down to the weight. But it feels good. You've got a wire pocket clip, reversible for either side, and mostly deep carry. You've got that compression lock that if you're right-handed, you can do with this knife all that Bugout stuff, and you've got a very capable, very easy to carry knife. All right, diving now into yet another lock type, and another option if you're looking for something that you want a more stable feel in the hand. A little bit less obvious, but still applicable, I think, is the Demko AD20.5. Price on these starts at about $150 for an AUS 10 or a D2 steel version. So a little bit more expensive than the Bugout with, not as premium of a steel. Or you can upgrade for about $190 to $200 this 3V option, which is a KnifeCenter exclusive right here with the Grivery scales. Really cool knife here, and it's not a lightweight knife. These come in about 3.5 ounces. So when we're talking comparison to the Bugout, it's definitely, it's almost 2 Bugouts essentially right there. But nice and slim. Again, I mentioned earlier on in this video, even if things weren't lightweight, the competition to this knife, the ease of carry is a priority there. And this is a very capable knife in a very thin package. Right-sided pocket clip, but you've got a left-sided one included in the package. You've got thicker blade steel here with not as high of a grind. This one does not equal the slicing capability of the Bugout. It's a little more kind of robust feeling, but you've got an ambidextrous finger-safe lock here at the back, that shark lock. Pull back on this tab, And you can do all of that axis lock stuff that you know and love, in addition to the other opening options on the level with this knife. Now the little fin of that lock actually makes a pretty decent thumb ramp there for placing your thumb on, or you can choke up in front of it for other uses, so it doesn't get in the way too much, even if you might expect it to. Really solid, hard-working option, a more rugged feeling alternative to the Bugout. All right, next one, we're gonna go a little more premium because there is no kind of budget option for this knife. And it's one that's a little less apparent just on paper, but it's one of those ones that, since I get to hold knives and hold a lot of different knives here all the time, you start to see some things that make sense together. The one I showed you earlier, that Altus, on paper, I don't think anyone would ever say, oh, that could be a Bugout competitor, but it's not until you hold them side by side. Even though the weight is not on the CIVIVI side here, it's one that makes sense. This next knife does the same thing, and that is the Sandrin Monza. Very interesting knife here. It's an expensive knife, comes in about $400, and the blade is not steel. It's a tungsten carbide, so you've got insane kind of edge retention with this material. Slightly more stylized drop point, but it's still a drop point, and sharpened length between these two knives. Actually, let's hold up this the Berkshire Forge titanium scaled version, just for continuity or consistency's sake visually. Sharpened edge, virtually the same between these two knives, even though the full quote-unquote blade length on the Sandrin is a little bit longer. But the cool thing about this as an alternative is that tungsten carbide blade, not just for its insane edge retention, but they come super, super thin. I mean, that is like a whisper of a blade material right there, compared to the standard Bugout. You can definitely see the difference right there. But it still has other things that kind of put it in the Bugout camp to me, or as a premium Bugout alternative. You have that deep carry pocket clip, nice kind of milled styling going on. It is reversible and very cool looking from the outside. And you have what they call the recoil lock, which is a spin-off of the Snex lock. It's similar in how you operate it to that shark lock we just looked at. Even though it doesn't quite interface with the tang of the blade in exactly the same way, you operate it the same way. Pull back on that tab with your finger, and you can flick it closed, flick it open, do the bug-outy stuff, use the thumb studs. Rock solid feel on that titanium handle. Just a really cool knife here. Blade actually reminds me a little bit of a Sebenza as well in terms of its overall shape, but that's another video, isn't it? But yeah, that could be a really nice premium alternative to the Bugout, made in Italy. Really crazy, slicey, thin blade right there. All right, last but not least, I'm gonna show you some slightly larger alternatives to the Bugout. Pretty much everything we've looked at so far is right about the same length. We've looked at a couple things that hit just under that 3-inch length as an alternative. But what if you like the philosophy of the Bugout, but you want more? You want one of those kind of like Big Easy style knives. Lightweight, easy to carry, but more length. The first is from Acta Verba, their A series. You've got the A200 right here, which comes with a G10 handle. The A100 with its FRN handles is even more, I think, of a kind of bigger Bugout option. The weight on that FRN, or GRN technically version, comes in at about 2.5 ounces, and the length you're getting here is a 3.6-inch blade. So you can see that in comparison to the Bugout. Whereas some of these kind of 3-inch bladed knives still feel in kind of the same class as the Bugout, shown here with that Sage 5 right there. This knife, this Acta Verba, definitely feels the next category up when you hold them together. More blade, more handle, but still prioritizing ease of carry. Even the G10 version is only 2.9 ounces, so still not too bad. Blade here is Sleipner steel, very capable stuff, decently thin, not quite as efficient, I would say, as the Bugout because you're not dealing with as high of a flat grind comparatively, and the blade thickness is just a little bit thicker overall. The thumb stud here is single-sided, has a glow-in-the-dark insert, but you can reverse it for either side. You're dealing with a crossbar style lock here, which they are calling their A-lock, kind of axis lock nod right there. And we've also got a reversible tail-mounted deep carry wire clip. Technically not tail-mounted, actually. It's mounted from the inside of the handle scale rather than on any kind of like backspacer right here. Really cool design, put together really well in the Czech Republic. They're smooth, whether you're using that crossbar lock or the thumb stud right there. Just feels very, very good. A little more style here too with that interesting partial swedge they've got going on. Really cool option for a larger version or a larger alternative to the Bugout. Of course, we have the tagged out, like I mentioned earlier, from Benchmade. More of a aggressive clip point though, so that may not be your thing. Like even this this Hogue Deka right here with its straight clip point still feels very Bugout adjacent. The aggressive clip point might not be for you that you would see on the tagged out, but it is an option that helps maintain a low weight like the Bugout. This next knife and the final knife on our list today doesn't get the weight awards, but the Huginn from Real Steel, in terms of its profile, very much feels like an upsized Bugout. It's even got a color scheme very similar to one of the versions of this Bugout, the Ranger Green and I think gray coated blade that you can get on the Bugout. But check out those profiles side by side, very similar. You've got a distilled drop point shape, pretty thin blade stock with a high flat grind, not quite as thin as the Bugout again, but a very similar handle shape, more handle to hold onto overall. Price on this could maybe be a slightly more budget alternative. It's a bigger budget alternative, about $95 for these. VG10 steel, 3.6 inches, kind of the same as that Acta Verba. We've got a tail-mounted deep carry clip here, so it's perfectly reversible. Dual thumb studs, crossbar style lock, tuned very well. Actually, they're doing a really good job with that lock. Weight, like I said, not quite as light. We're dealing 3.5 ounces here, so one of the heavier knives on the table at the moment. But if you're prioritizing the utility and the usability of what makes the Bugout good, this is a great larger option. All right, here's the part where you folks chime in the comments section down below. Let me know what you thought of these competitors to the Bugout. Can anything out there take its crown? Can you beat the Benchmade Bugout with any of these options? Or is there an option I forgot about? Let me know your thoughts for Bugout alternatives down in the comments. And if you want to get your hands on these knives, check out the links in the description. Those will take you over to KnifeCenter.com. And don't forget about our Knife Rewards program while you're there, because if you're gonna buy one of these Bugouts or Bugout alternatives, you might as well earn some free money to spend on your next one. I'm David C. Anderson from the Knife Center, signing off. See you next time.